Welcome to Case Closed, the Contingency Fee Podcast. On the show, our team of industry experts interviews contingency fee attorneys. You will discover everything from how they got started to the secrets of their success and what's working in today's marketplace. And now, here's the Case Closed Podcast.
Well, welcome to the Case Closed Podcast. I am your host, Michael Clanin, and today my guest is Matt Long with Long and Simmons Law in Phoenix area. And so I want to thank you, Matt, for joining us and agreeing to be on our podcast. And hopefully our listeners will learn a lot about you and your practice and how you help your clients.
Hi, Michael. Good to be with you and look forward to the conversation.
Yeah. So Matt, I have a bio of you, but it's pretty long. But I like to have my listeners share about themselves and their practice, personal, whatever you feel obligated to share, and then we'll go through some questions that I've prepared for our listeners to get to know you.
Yeah, you bet. I do practice in Arizona, and my practice does entail all of Arizona, although we're based in the Maricopa County area, the Phoenix area. I'm an Arizona kid. I was a Tempe kid and a Mesa father. Been here all my life, so I enjoy the heat, enjoy golf, and enjoy the Sun Devils.
Well, that's great. So how did you get into the area of law that you're in?
Yeah, I started with a mentor in high school, really, where I was reviewing capital appeals as a student reviewer with I call him mentor, but it's just kind of a family friend, just a good person to have in your life who kind of gave advice. And growing up, I loved LA law and thought I wanted to be a lawyer because of that, the Harry Hamblin, Corbin Burnson. And it was because they were trial lawyers and they were in there getting information, and they seemed to know more than everybody else in the room. And that interested me. And everybody in my life told me I was a constant arguer. And so it seemed that with that and writing and speaking a little bit, that I had the aptitude for that. But my mentor said that the only people that are really happy in the law that he's found are the people that do trials. Usually criminal. And so that was my path, where I did a lot of pretty complex cases that resulted in trial. In law school, I was what's called a Truman Young Fellow, which means the third year I was able to work as a student attorney rather than attend classes. So it was a fellowship, which was credits. I got paid and a tuition waiver. But when I walked out of law school, I had over 20 trials under my belt, and including about 10 jury trials. And so that kind of set me on my path of dealing with those cases that at least had those issues that required a courtroom, a trial, jurors and judges, which are unique cases because not many cases go to trial, and there's not really that many real trial attorneys anymore.
Wow. So you practiced both criminal law and personal injury law. What unique experiences and rewards come with handling cases in these two diverse areas?
Yeah, you say diverse, and what I found is they're not that diverse. They're really relevant. So in my firm, we deal with cars, sex, guns, and violence. And really, it comes down to that. A lot of my career has been in the what we call persons crimes, the child crimes area. So I became really knowledgeable and dealing with certain medical experts, right? Shaken baby syndrome, the mechanism of injury, the different types of way that a body would be injured by any violent act. And as part of that, I was also doing homicide cases, and a lot of that included some vehicular cases. So I went out on the scenes and got to see, firsthand car accidents, a lot more serious ones, sometimes resulting in deaths and multiple deaths. But there's a connection between personal injury, especially personal injury related to vehicle cases, violent crimes, sexual abuse cases, and criminal, because it really is about being able to prove who done it and how bad was it. And it's about mental state, it's about injury, it's about all these things. And so there is really a one-to-one between the types of cases that we handle criminally and the types of cases that we handle in personal injury. Because at some point, it really is about power structures. And, the government really has a ton of power. And when I say government, I'm really talking about the lobbyists. And so there's the connection between PI, because insurance companies have a ton of influence over our government and our laws and our politicians. So there really becomes, it seems diverse, but when you really break it down to the issues, it's basically the same approach, the same evidentiary approach, with just a different legal standard and different mental state.
Wow. Yeah. How everything is connected. Like you're looking at, it's really not connected. It is all intertwined.
It's the same thing.
Right.
The car accident comes in. I've effectively got a bad actor and someone who was harmed. If you want to use the word victim, that's fine. I don't like the word for a lot of reasons, but you have someone who done something wrong and someone who been done wrong. And now it's a question is, can we use the law? Can we use the justice system in order to get some sort of effect and have there be a consequence? Both sometimes it's a negative consequence, sometimes it's a positive consequence, depending on what role you're in. Right. And so it's a really is just an approach of trying to deal with the real world of tragedy. Because all these things we deal with, these street crimes, these mind crimes, these body crimes, and these events, are people who aren't used to dealing with tragedies being forced to do so. And you add a layer of the justice system, which is, unless you're in it, can be really confusing, can be really challenging. Our job is to simply help people navigate the realities of life. And what's life? Life ends up being about, the death, sex, drugs, and violence.
Wow. Hey, how did your early trial experience, as you mentioned, as the 2002 Truman Young Fellow during law school, shape your approach to becoming a trial attorney?
Well, primarily, I got real good advice I got the opportunity to train with some of the best trial attorneys in the country. And that's a matter of public record. That's not just hyperbole. Right? I'm not going to name drop, but I could.
No.
But what I learned early on was to seek the truth and endure the consequences. And that meant, in order to be a good advocate, in order to be an effective advocate, you had to be right about the position you were advocating. Otherwise, you just look like a fool and you look like you're trying to mislead somebody. And so that was the first principle, is that any position you take and are either asked to take, you decide to take, right? Because every attorney basically decides to take a case. You look for the argument, the facts, the evidence that's based in reality so you can advance them nobly. And that just means honestly and accurately. And whether I'm defending the worst of the worst, which I do, I handle death penalty cases. I handle death penalty cases as a prosecutor. I handle death penalty cases as a defense attorney, some of the most complicated cases. And people say, well, how do you do that? Right? Is a question. Well, I do it nobly. I do it honestly. And I find the arguments based on facts, reason, and evidence in order to advance those arguments. So that's the way that early trial work instructs trial work today, is don't be a BS artist like many attorneys are viewed. And with a little bit of investigation knowledge, experience, it's pretty easy to find the right hook, the right argument in order to advance the best arguments based on facts and evidence on behalf of your client.
I've never asked this with an attorney, so you're my guinea pig, but how do you separate, let's just say you're representing somebody and you really don't agree with what they did personally. How can you represent somebody but keep your personal judgment? So it's not a conflict of interest. Does that make sense?
I think so. And it's a common question we get. And again, I did prosecution at a very advanced level where I was, prosecuting murderers, sex offenders, child abusers, right? Some of what we'd say are the
Right.
worst of the worst. And now I defend the worst of the worst. So how do you do it? I mean, for me, it really is viewing our things like due process and the Constitution as not just fundamental, but really sacred. And that these concepts, it's not just that everybody deserves a defense, it's that when the government comes in and charges somebody, they are imposing some of the most terrifying and incredible power that exists. And so I see it as, when I was a prosecutor, I viewed being the person that stands between me, that I'm the person that's standing between the offender and a kid, which was often the case.
Right.
But now, as I've gotten more experienced and understand things a little more holistically, I'm really standing between that kid that grew up and is now doing very destructive things to them and other people, and the government who would punish them for it, and the government and the education system and the judges and whomever that didn't give these children resources to help them overcome what they experienced as victims. So in many ways, it's very, very easy because the kids that I was representing or was advocating for on behalf of the state are now the same people who have grown up and are doing destructive things. And so that combination of really believing in the concept of due process and the checks of power, the principalities, right? Very concerned with police, prosecutors, and politicians and the manner in which they impose their will on the lives of families. And so that's why it's very simple. It's not about what they've done. I render to Caesar that which is Caesar, and to God that which is God's. If you want to talk about what someone did, well, that's an interesting philosophical question. I'm more interested in what they can prove they did with the types of evidence and the types of investigation that everyone would demand if they were accused of something or if they were, in a situation. And really in personal injury, the same thing happens because the people that are injured, the people that are in an accident are viewed by the insurance companies, and in some cases, the criminal or the justice system as fraudsters. They think that these are just greedy, uninjured people who are lying about the extent of their injuries or lying about, how it's impacted them. And so my clients on the PI side are similarly being accused by the insurance adjusters of being fraudsters. And so when you look at that approach, because it is what's happening, and it's very, very easy simply to say, let's take an investigative approach, an evidentiary approach to be able to demonstrating with evidence that my guy, my girl, my client is in fact accurately advancing the position that they're taking. One may be, I didn't do it. One may be, I was falsely accused. One may be the police with their power screwed up enough and so bad that we ought not convict. One may be that the prosecutors are overzealous and aren't approaching the case with the way they ought to, or that the politicians erred in what they say ought to be punished, or the legislature or the insurance companies, right? Because let's be candid, insurance companies are a component of the legislature, are wrong in the manner in which they evaluate these facts or these laws. And we can find a different hook in order to advance what really happened. And so that's simple. It's simple when you take that approach. I think I view myself sometimes as a combination between a moral philosopher and a trial tactician. And so along with that, I've learned that most people simply aren't as bad as we portray them. And most people are far from as good as we portray them. And that reality actually makes my job quite easy. Most cops aren't bad.
Right.
Most cops also aren't good. Most cops are lazy. Most teachers aren't bad. Most teachers aren't good. Most teachers are lazy. Same with prosecutors. Same with politicians.
Mhm.
They get the role. They get, same with parents. How about that?
Right. Yeah.
It's really, we call good people good simply because they didn't do violence to us. But we're fine if they do violence to our enemy or somebody that's a stranger. So it becomes a question of mythology, really, of story. It's who we categorize as the victim, the villain, the hero, the stranger, and the reporter. And it's who the reporter is that I find so interesting, because it's a question of how reliable is their report. And that's where the magic happens in our job, where we investigate the reliability of the reporter. And from there, you get to the issue, and then it really doesn't matter what the person did or didn't do, because we can deal with facts and evidence, and that's the universe we work in. And I'll let the pastors and the priests and whomever else deal with existential questions of what actually happened. I deal in evidence, facts,
Right.
and our systems of proof, which is really due process. They matter, and they get us to a really, really interesting place, even though they don't always get us to, quote unquote, the right place.
Right. Thanks for sharing that. I enjoy your passion in all of that. Like I said, I've never asked an attorney about that, but thank you. I appreciate that. Seriously. And I
You're
hope our
welcome.
listeners do too. Um, so, and you kind of mentioned a little about this, so this may be a little redundant, but so your background includes prosecuting serious crimes, as you've mentioned.
Yeah. Street
Like
crimes, violent crimes, some of the most
right.
complex
Yeah. So
persons
like
crimes.
homicide and death penalty cases. What drove you to focus on defending individuals and seeking justice outside the prosecutor's office?
Yeah. Well, sometimes prosecutors are the ultimate politicians. And they're the ultimate politicians in Arizona because they're elected. And, you serve at the pleasure of the county attorney. And, you sometimes when you have to, and I had the opportunity to, make the sausage and see how things work behind the scenes and be in the rooms, there's Hamilton, right? The room where it happens.
Right.
And sometimes you find that villains exist in the rooms where they claim to be the heroes. And that was certainly the case with a county attorney that I worked for. And again, it's a matter of public record who that is and what he did and the political motivations. And what I saw particularly was this improper marriage between police and prosecutors. Whereas when I first started, there was this check and balance that the prosecutors provided a check and balance to the police. And that stopped being the case in Arizona. And so I saw that might be, I also viewed myself based on that as less of a, we say prosecutors wear the white hat, right?
Right.
And I found that was the case, except it might have been a white helmet. I was possibly a stormtrooper. And like the stormtroopers, boy, they shoot a lot, but they don't hit their target very often. And I found that too often it was about going and getting and punishing the person that was easy to get rather than the person who really needed to be got. And I saw a complete change, especially in the most violent crimes. And my particular area was in sex crimes for most of my career. As I saw the investigations wanting, and I saw the manner in which the prosecutors were taking cases to trial troubling. And so it was very easy to transition and do defense work in order to continue to train law enforcement and continue to train prosecutors, and in many ways continue to help support victims by doing defense work and ensuring the system could be held accountable, because it wasn't being held accountable by the prosecutors and the elected officials who were married policy-wise to law enforcement. And that was happening and continues to happen too often in Arizona, and I'm sure other parts of the country. Now, fortunately, I was also able to continue in private practice now to represent victims in civil cases and do investigations and advance cases related to the sexual misconduct, sexual offenses by offenders and institutions that provide cover, support, and protection for the offenders of certain crime. And so I do both of those now here, and that's certainly been a challenge. And I found that the victims ultimately don't have a whole lot of resources in that realm. And so that's very easily why I was able to move to the other side and essentially do the same thing I was doing as a prosecutor, asking the same questions, challenging the police just as I would as a prosecutor, except before I would challenge the police and say, go get more evidence so that we can make this easy, so that we can build a wall of evidence around this victim. And now it's going into court and challenging the cops and saying, you didn't go get this type of evidence. You violated your policies. You violated best practices. And as a result, you did not provide this jury with enough evidence in order to make a decision, and they should punish you for it by finding this person not guilty. So again, it's the same approach, just a slightly different venue where I get to utilize my investigation and advocacy skills.
Right. Can you share with us one case? I mean, there's probably a case out there that you think back on, or either it was a turning point in your career, or it was a challenge to do, or made an impact.
Absolutely. I mean, there's been a number of them. And anytime you have to talk to a kid about some of the most intimate, violent, and complex experiences that they have, whether they're a witness or whether they're a victim, that impacts you. And you get insight when you really get into the mind of a child that has to deal with the criminal justice system, including the children of the accused. So that's the first thing, just I'll say as almost as an archetype, right? Yeah. As an amalgamation. Yeah. But the one that really impacted me the most was cases related to clergy, the institutional abuse, and the manner in which certain clergy, religions, and churches are protected in their role as a religion when sexual abuse in particular occurs. And there was a number of cases I was involved with as what's called an app counselor. I was a consulting attorney in some cases around the country. And that is an area that's one of my practice areas. Is I do training. I am a testifying expert on some issues. And I do provide consultation on criminal related stuff, especially sex crimes throughout the country. And one of the areas that I provided particular experience in was related to a Salt Lake based religion. And there's current litigation going on that I was involved with and that other attorneys were involved with. And in that, they made a very legal argument that they don't have a duty to protect the children of their members and donors. And it's a legal question. And for me, it was fascinating and a little troubling because they enjoy the benefits, the legal benefits of what's called a clergy exception, which the government grants these institutions. The church that's out of Italy, out of the Vatican, as well as the church that's based out of Salt Lake City are the two largest and primary ones that enjoy a clergy exception to mandatory reporting laws, where everyone, doctors, psychologists, teachers, cops, these are all mandatory reporters if they find out about abuse. And clergy members do too, because these are people who are most likely to get told something by a child that they're being harmed. Right. Well, these two churches, and in Arizona, there is a clergy exception that says that if a clergy member of one of these institutions finds out about the abuse, they don't have to report legally. So they have this legal exception that's a benefit. And they're claiming, when they say you didn't do what you could have done to protect this child, They say, but we don't have a legal duty to protect them. And that became an interesting legal question, because what it effectively says is that the laws of Arizona protect the children from those religious institutions differently than it does the children in other religious institutions or those who may not have a religious affiliation. And that changed my approach to life, and it changed my approach to the law, primarily because now I talk to victims all the time and explain to them why suing an institution is a big challenge. Now, I've been talking about lobbying earlier and insurance companies. Do you see the connection between lobbyists, the legislature, pastors, and politicians? So they're granted these protections and these legal rights. And with that right, they say they don't have a duty. And that instructs me as it relates to how the justice system works, how legislatures actually work, how policies are affected, and how ultimately we're comfortable in sacrificing our children in the name of policy.
And how frustrating is that? And is there any way in the future to overcome this so these groups don't have these protections or exemptions?
Well, the best way is for people to be aware of the inequity and the different approaches, and to demand that their legislatures protect all children the same. Now, there's also maybe some legal issues that could happen, and me and some other attorneys, myself and other attorneys, may be involved in looking into that as to how we might be able to address it from a First Amendment challenge, saying that maybe these children have a claim that they can raise in courts, saying that these laws ought to be changed from a constitutional perspective. That's one thing that may happen. These victims may also have a cause of action against their elected officials and the politicians and individuals that are also involved in the system. So there's a couple ways that we can do. We can do it by encouraging change, or we go to the courts and we say that it's either unconstitutional, the current laws, or that a person ought to be punished, because there must be someone out there that has a duty to protect children. And maybe the only people that have a duty to protect children are, in fact, parents, because that's the case. So maybe we have victims that need to simply sue their parents for failing to protect them and failing to meet their duty to children. And maybe if enough of that happens, that will create enough noise to change the mandatory reporting laws as it relates to clergy exceptions in Arizona and other states. Now, not all states are the same way. This is Arizona, this is Utah, Idaho. It's generally the states where certain religious institutions have particular influence and control over the politicians.
Wow. I mean, the thing is, the general public, they don't know what they don't know, right?
Sure. The insurance companies do a really good job of establishing a mythology, a false narrative, right? Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there, where they ain't a good neighbor. They do a good job of promoting every situation where somebody has committed insurance fraud or lied or misstated. And they do a really good job of misstating and misleading things about facts that, may not be true. The McDonald's coffee case is one everybody knows about.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Oh my gosh, what a travesty. Well, that was advanced by the insurance company. But you really break down the facts. McDonald's was holding that coffee at a temperature that was irresponsible, and it was different than virtually every other retail establishment in the area. And had they kept that temperature at the levels that the other businesses and restaurants were, and that woman had spilled, there wouldn't be injury. So that's the case. That's a factual case that nobody hears about. And the award that was given by the jury was actually reduced by the judge as well. So that person didn't get that big of an award, but the insurance company advanced a narrative that says, wow, this person has done something wrong. And so there's this presumption out there. There's this idea. If you sue, you're a bad person. You're a greedy person. And so the insurance company has done a phenomenal job convincing people not to talk to an attorney or hire an attorney, because they'll be the greedy ones. They'll be the bad one. And churches do the same thing. They do a great job at advancing a narrative that they're there to help. They're there to protect. They're there to do all these things, right? Police do a great job of that. That protect and serve is a marketing thing. It's not a duty. It's not it's a mission statement. We'd like this to happen. But when they get sued, they say, that's not our duty. Our duty is to enforce. We have qualified immunity. And so it's these principalities that constantly advance false narratives that the rank and file people just have come to accept culturally and societally, when it's not consistent with what the real world is like.
Wow. Yeah. Well, hey, Matt, we're coming to a close, but is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners about you or your practice or anything?
We like what we do. We have a very particular practice, a very particular, area of expertise and experience. It's me and my partner. If you hire us, you get us. My partner also is just one of the most experienced and knowledgeable trial attorneys in Arizona. And I think the main message I'd send to people is, it really is a tragedy when you have to be dealing with, crime scenes or courtrooms. And when something happens that requires a police to get called out, whether it's an accident report, whether it's a crime or anything else, that is a big deal. And getting accurate information about the real world is the best path to navigating that tragedy. And too many people look for people who give them the answer they want. And that results in a lot of aggravation, a lot of stress, and a lot of conflict. And so, wherever you are, vet your attorney, get a second opinion. There's a reason why it's the practice of law. Too many people make decisions because they just don't want to make a decision, and they have to. And so they rush to the first attorney that they get access to because they just don't want to think about it. And more error has happened through that than finding the right attorney by vetting them and asking questions. Always get a second opinion before you hire an attorney.
Right.
Pretty simple.
Make sure it's a good fit. And you're working with an attorney in that expertise, right? Not a general practitioner.
That's right. And ask questions about how long they've been doing it, the types of cases they've actually handled. Too many people are good at holding themselves out as having expertise because they use BS words. But when you really dig into that, they haven't done what they claim to have done. They don't have the actual, they haven't spilt the actual mud in actual blood. They've heard of stories and they regurgitate stories, but they're telling stories about other people. Right. When you come to our firm, we don't tell stories about other people. We tell you stories about what we've done, and other people end up telling stories about us.
Right. Great. How do our listeners find you?
Yeah, so our website, the best way, right? The internet is longandssimmonslaw.com. They can also get information that we provide about cars, sex, guns, and violence on our podcast, which is Prosecuting Mind Crime, because every tragedy ends up doing violence to the mind.
Wow. Great. I didn't know you had a podcast. I'll have to check it out. And hopefully our listeners will too. So, well, thanks for joining us on this podcast, Matt. And hopefully, some people have learned a little about you and your practice. And, if they ever need help, hopefully they think of you and that. But this has been Michael Clanin, your Case Closed podcast host. along with Matt Long with Long and Simmons Law in Phoenix, Arizona. So if you want to learn more about him, just go to longandssimmonslaw.com. And we'll look forward to hearing or seeing you on our next Case Closed podcast. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Case Closed, the Contingency Fee Podcast. We hope you enjoyed listening to this week's guests and their insight. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. Case Closed, the Contingency Fee Podcast, is led by industry experts who unlock insights from the nation's top contingency fee attorneys. Each week on the show, the guests share how they got started, secrets of their success, and what's working in today's marketplace. Guests on the Case Closed podcast include successful contingency fee attorneys that will share their secrets so you can close more cases. Tune in each week for a dynamic conversation about winning legal strategies that will grow your business.